Good afternoon and happy Tuesday. I'm Susanna Kidd.
And I'm Franco Pesci.
And you're listening to Science at One.
We are the home of good music and even better science, here at Imperial College London.
You are joining us on YouTube Live today, so feel free to leave any comments or questions via the comment section or the chat.
On today's program, we are honoring Black History Month and will be exploring science connection to Black history by recognizing individuals that may have otherwise been left out of the conversation.
Today we will be amplifying the voices of Black scientists and researchers whose inventions and life's work have changed our everyday lives, such as a professor who started out interested in frogs and ended up learning about a much bigger environmental issue. And lastly, we'll be hearing about a woman who is interested in reaching for the stars. That's all coming up right here at Science at One. Before we dive into this week's stories, let's hear some of the news from the week. This week, Nature and Associated Journals announced that they are piloting an open access article programme with institutions across Germany. According to a news report from Science, articles published under the programme will be immediately available, meaning that anyone can read the article and no subscription to the journal will be required. While open access keeps research from being behind a paywall, institutes will have to pay more for publishing the articles to cover the journal's operating costs.
This comes as Europe research funders called for a transition to more open access research articles. An American research funder, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, announced earlier this month that as of January 1st, 2022, all HMI laboratories will be required to publish research in an open access format.
A research report this week in Nature shows how the diabolical ironclad beetle shell makes it uniquely sturdy and nearly uncrushable. Researchers from the University of California, Irvine, made 3D scans of the beetle that show how its wing cases interlock, like jigsaw puzzle pieces, in a way that makes them able to withstand immense pressure and protect them, thus earning their name as the diabolical ironclad beetle.
NASA reported this week that their space mission, OSIRIS-REx, successfully collected samples of asteroid material from the asteroid Bennu. The organization shared images collected last Thursday of the sampling apparatus collecting debris. The OSIRIS-REx mission was launched in 2016, sending a spacecraft to the asteroid Bennu to collect samples and return to Earth for further study. The spacecraft is expected to return to Earth in 2023.
Some other interesting news from space is that they actually found water on the moon. Did you see that, Franco?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And Nature also recently reported that trials are going to begin in the UK to study coronavirus, in which human participants in the trial will be intentionally exposed to the coronavirus responsible for COVID-19. The Human Challenges trial, as it's being called, is being led by clinical research institution Open Orphan, with support from the UK government. Proponents of the programme claim that these trials will provide useful information and help identify effective vaccines. However, some have criticised the study, questioning its necessity with the vaccine trials expected to happen soon.
Instead, recent studies published in Science reveal more about the intelligence of birds. One study from researcher at Ruhr University Bochum revealed that the sensory forebrain of birds has a structured architecture, built with layers, which is similar to mammalian brains.
In another study coming from the University of Tübingen, researchers presented crows with a visual stimulus that was difficult to see and required the birds to indicate whether they perceived the stimulus or not. The birds that were able to see the stimulus showed neurons firing in a different part of the brain than birds who were not able to see the stimulus. This research suggests that birds may be capable of conscious thought. Before we get into our first story on today's programme, let's listen to a fellow student on the Science Communications course, Rebecca Lindo, who goes by Rael. This is her first single that we are so excited to share with you.
Never knew quite what to say to you. just show me I'm alone. No, I'm not lonely. Was meant to be with me. I will not say another word. Say another word. Take mine. Sun goes down, but still I feel. Sun gone down, but still I feel alright. I can't sleep without you. By my side, still wake up in the morning, find a way to make this right. Ooh, to make this right. All these questions that I'm asking still. How do I know if what you said was real? How do I separate the lead from gold? The good, the bad, these lies you told you. You said you love me, ooh. No one above me, ooh. Well, how can that be true when your actions speak louder than you? Well, I just thought what I said to you. Wrong, I never really needed you. We both know we've been here before. Forever thankful for what you showed me. I'm alone, no, I'm not lonely. Was meant to be with me. And now no sun goes down, but still I feel. Sun going down, but still I feel alright. Wake up in the morning, like, find a way to make this right. I will not say another word. Ooh, to make this right. It's just fine. I can't sleep better without you. Wake up in the morning, find a way to make this
That was Sundown by Rebecca.
So there are many hidden figures within the black science community that I don't know about you, Franco, but I felt were definitely left out of the conversation at school and university in my experience. So in this segment, I would like to pay homage to a few of them. One group that springs to mind is the African-American female mathematicians that served as the brains behind one of the greatest operations in US history, the race against Russia to put a man in space. These women were untapped talent within NASA and coined human computers. Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, and Katherine Goebbels Johnson broke down barriers at a time where gender and race posed a threat to their desire to dream big. We are all familiar with Thomas Edison having invented the light bulb, but a black inventor named Lewis Latimer actually made it better and more accessible. These are just a few examples of where black researchers and scientists haven't been amplified as I feel they should. So, Franco, I wondered if you could tell me how you actually arrived on campus today.
Glad you asked. I recently bought an electric scooter.
Very
it's
nice.
Really fun. Not with this weather, but...
Yeah. And what did you use in terms of navigation to get there?
Normally I use or Waze or Google Maps.
Nice. And do you actually have any idea who's responsible for the technology behind such an app?
I have literally no clue.
So I have been researching an amazing woman, Dr. Gladys West. She's the black woman behind GPS technology. She is a mathematician known for her contributions to the mathematical modelling of the shape of the Earth. And it wasn't until 2018 that she would finally be recognised for her very important work that led to the development of one of the most necessary tools we all use in our everyday lives, the GPS. Hired at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia in 1956, Dr. Gladys West was only one of 4 black employees and the second black woman ever hired. Dr. West retired in 1998 after working at Dahlgren for 42 years and is a true hidden figure that thankfully was still around to receive the recognition she deserved. So the reason we chose this theme to speak about today is obviously October marks Black History Month in the UK, and Science at One hopes to take the opportunity to celebrate the history and achievements of black people in science. The dedicated month was intended as a way to combat the perceived invisibility of black people and challenge negative stereotypes. Black History Month was first launched in London in 1987, where the aim was for the local community to challenge racism and educate themselves and others about the history that was not taught in schools. It is important, I feel, that we educate ourselves on the hidden figures that have been so crucial in shaping our everyday lives. We must look backwards to learn from the past in order to all move forward together, and we intend here at Science at One to ensure that everyone is a part of our conversations. It will also be crucial to us that Black history is not just confined to one month, but celebrated, of course, all year round.
Next, we will hear from a professor at UC Berkeley who became interested in the effects of chemical pollutants. But first, we'll hear a song from the band Sea Castle from Seattle, Washington, over in the States. This song is off their album Before We Fell In. This is Rainy Habits by Sea Castle.
That was Rainy Habits by Sea Castle, a nice uplifting tune on this rainy day. You can find their music at seacastle.bandcamp.com.
Susanna, have you ever started a project that then turned out to be completely different from what you ever expected?
Yes, many, Franco, many.
Well, next we have Tyrone Hayes, who is a professor at UC Berkeley, whose research has focused on the effects of herbicide atrazine on amphibians. For many years, Novartis Syngenta, the manufacturers of atrazine, and its firmest founders, used underhand tactics and personal attacks to try and discredit him.
His studies have been published in PNAS and Nature, and his work on the effects of chemical pollutants has recently led him to become an environmental justice advocate. This is an abridged version of his TEDx talk from 2018.
Before I tell you my story today, I want to start with this phrase. It's a Bantu proverb that I learned while working in Southern Africa. Loosely translated, it means I am because we are, or people are people through other people. So I never represent myself or tell my story without thanking the people who've made me who I am. First and foremost, my friends and family, especially my mother and father, for a lifetime of support, my wife, Catherine Kim, and my son and daughter for their continued support. I also have to thank the funding sources for the research that I've done. And this is also my disclosure. I have been funded by the chemical manufacturers, but they've since decided they don't like to hang out with me so much. But that's okay. I want to thank all the students that have been involved, especially the undergraduates in blue, my current laboratory, for providing a great environment with an incredibly diverse group of people that I'm certain that I learn a lot more from them than they learn from me. So now my story. About a week ago, I was in Minneapolis airport to give a similar talk. And the person, I was in a restaurant, and the person who took my order and brought me my food asked what brings you to the Twin Cities? And I said, well, I'm giving a talk at McAllister College. What my daughter is, I'm a professor of biology. And she said, wow, you don't look like a professor. And I looked up and I said, well, that's funny because you look exactly like a waitress. And I don't normally judge people by their appearance, but she had the apron and the name tag and the tablet. And actually, the end of the story is not true. That's the thing where you go, gee, I wish I had said. What I said was, thanks for the compliment, but I didn't really mean it because I didn't really take it as a compliment. But not only do I not look like a professor, for most of my life, I haven't felt like a professor. For most of my life, I felt like just a little boy who likes frogs. That all changed a few years ago when a chemical company, the largest chemical company in the world, asked me to use my expertise in studying frog hormones to try to understand if the chemical, their number one selling product, a weed killer, atrazine, if it interfered with their hormones somehow. Long story short, we examined the African clawed frog in my lab, we exposed them to this chemical atrazine, and we showed things like this. And these are testes, and you don't have to have a PhD or be a frog expert to see that there's a difference between the control and the exposed animals. The control testes, if you look at it under the microscope, is full of sperm soldiers ready to go. The atrazine-treated gonad or testes, the testicular tubules are filled with cellular debris. What's more is if you look at the young developing larvae, you often find sometimes, these are the kidneys, if you're not used to looking at frog gonads, that this is an individual, though, that has testes, then it has more ovaries, then it has another testes, then it has more one pair will get you in enough trouble. This situation is certainly not typical of amphibians. There are fish that are naturally hermaphrodites, but not amphibians. Now, I showed this to the Environmental Protection Agency because I thought they'd be interested. After all, it's the number one selling chemical in the world at the time. And they said, well, that's not really an adverse effect that would stimulate us to reassess the chemical. So then I started to think, we published that. We published that in Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences and Nature, very prestigious journals that'll get you a tenured professorship at a place like UC Berkeley. But journals that, as my mom says, how important can it be? Barnes and Noble's never heard of them. And I started to think, though, about how my work might imply things beyond frogs. So this is a pond in Lake Nabugabo in Uganda, where I started to think that this agricultural runoff might not only affect the frogs and the fish, but also the other animals that are drinking out of the water, including the humans that collect their drinking and cooking water from this same source. A colleague of mine showed, because I don't study humans, I had to work with other people on this, that if you look at men in Columbia, Missouri, and compare the atrazine in their urine, men who have atrazine in their urine have a low sperm count and can't get their wives pregnant. Another colleague showed, and I've mashed the data down now, because these are atrazine levels of men who work in the fields in California, and these are atrazine levels of men who apply atrazine in California. 2,400 parts per billion. They have 24,000 times the atrazine in their urine than we use to chemically castrate frogs and fish. 24,000 times what we know is already having a negative impact on men in Columbia, Missouri. Then a little boy who likes frogs learns phrases like environmental justice, because most of these individuals are Latinx or in California, Mexican American. I became concerned. I'm just a little boy who likes frogs, but I became concerned because if you look at the top 13 cancers you're going to get in this country, blacks, African Americans are more likely to get 11 out of the 13 and more likely to die from 13 out of 13. My colleagues who are experts in cancers tell me that less than 30% of cancer can be explained by genetics. That means that when the doctor tells you that you're going to get breast cancer, more likely if your sister, your aunt, or somebody in your family has it, they're not telling you have bad genes necessarily. They're telling you that you've been exposed to the same crap as the rest of your family. Because if you're a minority, if you're an immigrant, if you're first generation, if you're low income, you're more likely to live in and more likely to work in areas where you're exposed to chemicals that we know are associated with adverse health outcomes. What's more is, with the exception of HeLa cells, the cancer cells that we use to study cancer don't come from minorities. So even if we find the cure, it may not be applicable to people who would need it the most. It's just a correlation, but we already know, studies have already been done by the Center for Disease Control and others, that if you get pregnant doing peak atrazine contamination, you're more likely to have babies with birth defects. The EPA has acknowledged this, but they say, quote, a monetary value is assigned to disease impairments and shortened lives and weighed against the benefits of keeping a chemical in use. A monetary value. If you look at California, we're the 5th or 7th, depends on who you talk to, largest economy in the world. Because of agriculture, not because of tech or Hollywood. We produce 50% of the U.S.'s food. Half of the U.S.'s food comes from California. As a result, we use more pesticides than any other state, and 90% of the workers are Latinx. Environmental justice. So the people who make us the 5th largest economy in the world are the same people who are paying that cost that the EPA talks about. And so when I thought about this as a little boy who likes frogs, it motivated me to cross the line, so to speak. Crossing that line cost me. The chemical manufacturers set out to discredit me with personal attacks. They said, hey, he's biologist turned activist. Turned activist. You can't be a scientist and an activist. I had to make a change. Academia, my advisor told me, don't be an advocate. Let the science speak for itself. But I had to think about this, that we're being rewarded in the ivory tower, promoted for publishing things that the public doesn't have access to. We have to change the way we do things in the ivory tower. There's a philosophy by a great thinker that goes like this: those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act. And I didn't grow up privileged. I don't know about you. All I know is that now I'm here. Now you are here. You are privileged and you have a duty. And I've reasoned that we can change the past, but only if we act now, while it is still the future.
If you're interested in finding out more about Professor A's work, he was the speaker at this year's Princeton F9 lecture, which is available on YouTube.
Next up, we have a bit more music for you from Josh Barry, an artist that oozes funk and soul. Having toured the world as Gorgon City's male vocalist for the last 5 years and supporting Rag and Bone Man with the Josh Barry Project, his new single has been much anticipated. This is All Add Up by Josh Barry.
So
That was All Add Up by Josh Barry. It's one of my favourite songs at the moment, and despite not being able to do live gigs due to the current situation that doesn't need any more airtime, he is very active on his Instagram account at Josh Barry Music, so go check him out.
Next up, 3 inventions made by African Americans that completely revolutionized our daily lives. Good afternoon, everyone. The following podcast will talk about a few black inventors and how they made our daily life easier. Most people have heard about famous inventions like the light bulb, the cotton gin, and the iPhone. But there are countless others, often overlooked inventions that make our daily life easier. Among the creative innovators behind these devices are African American inventors, from the traffic light to the ironing board. Next on is an invention that's used worldwide by any housekeeper, man, woman, and maybe not children on the planet. I'm talking about the ironing board. The ironing board is a product that's used possibly just as much as it's overlooked. In the late 19th century, it was improved upon by Sarah Bone, an African American woman who was born a slave. One of the first black women in US history to receive a patent. She expanded upon the original ironing board, which was essentially a horizontal wooden block originally patented in 1858. With Bone's 1892 edition, the board featured a narrow and curved design, making it easier to iron garments, particularly women's clothing. Bone's design will morph into the modern ironing board that we use today. How often do you use the ironing board, and could you imagine ironing your clothes without it?
I probably use the ironing board almost every day, and no, I honestly wouldn't know where to iron my clothing if I didn't have one.
Do you think it will be an hazard to iron without the board?
I think it would. I think if I were to iron on a wooden table or a glass table, I'd be scared the glass one were to shatter and the wooden one were to burn and maybe start a fire.
One of these great inventions that changed our daily life was home security systems. Before security systems became a fixture in home, an African-American nurse, Mary Van Britten Brown, devised an early security unit for her own home. She spent many nights at home alone in Queens, New York, while her husband was away and felt unsafe with really high rates of crime in her neighborhood. On top of that, police at the time were really unreliable and unresponsive, so she created a device that would put her mind at ease. In 1966, Brown invented a system that used a camera that could slide into and look through 4 peepholes in her front door. The camera's view would then appear on a monitor in her home, so she could survey any potentially unwanted guests. She added other features to the system, including a microphone to speak to anyone at the door, a button to unlock the door, and a button to contact the police. She and her husband took out a patent for the system in the same year, and they were awarded the patent 3 years later, in 1969. Home security systems commonly used today took various elements from her design. So Jen, do you have an alarm in your home? And would you feel unsafe sleeping at home alone?
I do have an alarm in my home, and I would feel unsafe sleeping alone in my house without the alarm on.
Why?
Because you never know what happens, and if I'm alone, I don't know if I would be able to defend myself, worst case scenario.
The next invention will be an invention that completely revolutionized road safety. I'm talking about the 3-light traffic light, invented by Garrett Morgan in 1923. With only an elementary school education, black inventor and son of slave Garrett Morgan came up with several significant inventions, including an improved swing machine and the gas mask. However, one of Morgan's most influential inventions was the improved traffic light. Without his innovation, drivers across the nation will be directed by a 2-light system. Thanks to the success of his other innovations, Morgan became the first black person in Cleveland, Ohio to own a car. As a motorist, he witnessed a severe car accident at an intersection in the city. In response, he decided to expand on the current traffic light by adding a yield component, warning oncoming drivers of an impeding stop. He took out the patent for the creation in 1923, and it was granted to him the following year. Jen, could you imagine a world without the existence of a yellow traffic light?
I think that must be a very scary world to live in. I couldn't imagine how unsafe drivers would feel on the road without those 5 seconds of timing where they can be able to realize and stop the car, and hit the brakes.
So Jen, how much do you think these inventions had an impact on the world today?
I think these inventions were very beneficial for our world that we live in today, and I couldn't imagine living without all 4 of these inventions.
I completely agree, Jen. These inventions completely shook the world we live in today. They're legend.
Wait for it,
dairy! Before we get to our last segment, we have one more song to play. Now you will hear a remix of the song Mr. World by Philo Valls, my former classmate in high school, remixed by Sander W. and Sandero.
Imagine a world where you can stop the time, look inside your window and simply enjoy the sunshine, singing night, 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 singing night, 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 night. Imagine a world where shooting stars haven't that far. They haven't shy and rather than dying to feel alive, singing night, 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 singing night, 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 night. I miss the world, why haven't you like this? I miss the world, tell us how can we change it? Show us how can we change it?
That was Mr. World by Philo Valls, remixed by Sander W. and Sandero.
So we've actually just had a comment come in from a listener who says, sadly they have to crack on with their day, but can they listen to the show or finish listening to the show later on? So just to let you know, you can always catch up with Science at 1 on our YouTube channel and listen to them at your leisure. So to round up our programme today, we have a fun story to bring you that focuses on a woman who hopes to lead humanity even further into the stars.
Our correspondent, Belle Eddington, brings us this.
And now for a spotlight piece on one woman who had a big impact on Earth and beyond. In 1993, we saw the first real astronaut appear as a cast member on the iconic Star Trek The Next Generation series. Dr. May C. Jemison appeared as transporter pad attendant Lieutenant Palmer in an episode titled Second Chances. But 1 year before this momentous occasion, Jemison boldly went where few had gone before. In 1992, the Space Shuttle Endeavour blasted off, and NASA astronaut Jemison became the first woman of colour to reach space. Jemison was born in 1956 and grew up in Chicago, spending hours in her school library reading about all aspects of science, but especially astronomy. Jemison was concerned that aliens wouldn't understand humanity if they were only met with the white men that usually staffed NASA's spaceships at the time. She was inspired after seeing fictional character Commander Uhura representing women of colour on the Starship Enterprise, and Jemison told herself that she too would fly on a spacecraft one day. On June 4th, 1987, Jemison became the first African-American woman to be admitted into the NASA astronaut training program. A year later, she earned the title of the first African-American female astronaut and was named the Science Mission Specialist. This meant that she would be the one to conduct crew-related scientific experiments on the space shuttle. Finally, Jemison flew into space with 6 other astronauts aboard the Endeavour on September 12, 1992. Mae Jemison had become the first woman of colour to reach space. She spent 8 days in space and conducted numerous experiments on herself and the crew, hoping to investigate weightlessness and motion sickness. When she came back down to Earth, Jemison said that society should recognise how much women and other minority groups can contribute if given the opportunity. She discussed her feelings about being the first woman of colour in space with France 24 reporter in 2018.
As a little girl, I always assumed I'd go into space. Space exploration was something that I intended to do. I never necessarily wanted to be an astronaut, but what floored me actually about the whole endeavor in many ways was because I was not just the first African-American woman in space, I was the first woman of color in the entire world to go into space, which was really sad for me because I would have assumed that we would have had lots of different people in space by the time I got old enough to do that. Everyone has always been involved with space exploration. So if people remember that movie Hidden Figures, right, where African-American women were calculating orbits and things, and we just never heard the story, right? The whole term computers comes from women who, in the turn of the 1800s to the 1900s, they used to do all the computations, mathematical computations, particularly for astronomers and others. And so a lot of this is about how do we use this full potential of all these people that we have in the world. So in 1992, when that happened and I went up, of course I was excited to go up. Yet at the same time, we should recognize how we've always been involved.
In Jemison's lifetime, she's received too many awards to list on our segment today, several honorary doctorates, and Jemison was also voted as one of the top 7 women leaders in a presidential ballot national straw poll. Jemison established the Jemison Group, who strive to improve life for humanity through the advancements of technology, science and engineering, among other things. One way she aims to do this is through aiming for audacious concepts like interstellar travel and seeing what advancements are capable along the way. 100 Year Starship is perhaps their most famous and optimistic project.
So here's the thing, 100 Year Starship is about making sure we have the capabilities for human travel beyond our solar system in 100 years. That's very different from a launch date or have all the systems together, right? And I was really proud and pleased to lead the team that won the seed funding, really modest seed funding from DARPA to try to put together an organization to help foster this. So the issues that we're really looking at is how do you make sure we have the radical leaps in technology that we need in order to do something that incredible? So our idea around 100 Year Starship is that it's by pursuing the extraordinary that we create a better world today.
Science communication student Sophie is going to tell us more about the possibility of interstellar travel.
Hello, I'm Sophie Burley. I'm an astrophysicist and I've spent the last 2 years working at the European Space Agency.
So, 100 Year Starship definitely sounds like something from a sci-fi movie. What do they actually mean by interstellar travel?
Each of the stars that we see at night can, and many, if not most, do have their own full planetary systems, and they are so worth exploring. Interstellar travel describes any way that we or any of our unmanned spacecraft could make our way to other solar systems. In fact, taking the word interstellar, you have inter meaning between and stellar relating to stars. So just as you take an international flight to a new country, we could take an interstellar flight to a whole new solar system.
That sounds so cool. So why is it considered to be so important?
Ooh, for exploration, in a word. Well, I just think the human race has this innate instinct to want to explore, and to discover and explain things. We have so many questions. For example, what is life? Why are we here? Are we alone? And we're just about getting to that point with our science that we might be able to start providing some of these answers. Going back to, in the early 90s, we discovered our first exoplanet, the first planet outside of our solar system that was not orbiting our sun. And since then, we've added another 4,000 to our records. But each of these planets offers a new chance to understand why the universe and life itself exists. It also offers the opportunity to find any neighbours we might share it with, which is really exciting. But we're only going to be able to fully explore what we are able to physically go and observe. And for that, we need interstellar travel.
And are you able to tell us about any obstacles that might be ahead of interstellar travel being a reality?
I think it's hard to comprehend, as humans, quite how large the distances between each of these stars are, because when we look up at the sky, we can see so many. But to give a little context, if Apollo 11 had, instead of the moon, been directed at our nearest star, after the sun, it would have taken them about 100,000 years to reach their destination. That's about 5,000 human generations. And, these distances present huge, huge obstacles for us. In Star Wars, the problem is resolved by just jumping to hyperdrive and instantly travelling faster than light. And Star Trek uses the only slightly slower warp speed, but simply put, we're just not there yet with our faster-than-light technology. And, well, until we are, we can expect our journeys are going to take much, much longer. And so we need to think about how we would keep a 5,000 generation space crew going.
How do you think that interstellar travel could be achieved?
How are we going to do it? What a question, and I really wish I had the answer. But I do think that Mae Jemison's initiative is a really great start. I think it's easy to think we've sort of passed the great age of space exploration, but really we've just entered a new age with lots of new possibilities. Just earlier this year, we had the SpaceX NASA launch. That's the first time NASA have outsourced their rocket to an outside company. And so many small-scale space startups are springing up everywhere. So Jemison's 100-year Starship really just offers great incentive to work in this field at a really exciting time.
Thanks. And do you have any other thoughts on 100-year Starship?
I think it's great. I think with space exploration and research like this, often people feel held back. Maybe because no one wants to take risks or be thought of as silly or some kind of sci-fi dreamer, by other research professionals. But I think all the best space breakthroughs have come with taking these risks and having big dreams. So I think it's a great way to inspire and push more people onto this challenge.
Science definitely has a long way to go before interstellar travel is possible, but the team at 100-year Starship are optimistic.
When I was in space, what I recognized as I looked down, the planet is gorgeous. It iridesces from within. And I recognize, the moon, the stars, they're going to be here. The Earth is going to be here, but we might not be. We get this all confused. The Earth doesn't need us. We need the Earth. And so we really have to figure out ways to connect. And so for 100-year Starship, what we're really doing is saying, how can we use this platform, right, of something really difficult and connect it back to the Earth?
Thank you so much, Bella, and to all your contributors. That was incredibly insightful. So that's it for our show this week. Thank you so much for listening and sharing your precious time with us. To support all of the musicians you've heard on today's programme, you can search for their songs on both SoundCloud and Spotify.
Be sure to join Science at 1 next week, as we will hear stories related to the US elections, as well as some spooky Halloween fun. This has been Science at 1, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.